Hi class. Before you start coding or building any kind of project, you should write down the ideas and make some kind of goals. And then you pick the content that matches that. Most of it will involve some kind of typography in the coding here. And we know that typography changes the reader's perception and how it looks. When we look at something, we immediately have some kind of impression. Sometimes that impression has to be given already by the brand that you're working with, so it's kind of dictated to you to match that, and you can't just break that. You can just use another typeface than they usually do. It would like people would be confused what's going on. And the brand often is like here you can see from the new school, Paula Scher designed that one. It's supposed to be like a university, so there can be a little edgy. Some of the letters are thicker or thinner here, so it has kind of a personality in that way. A totally different would be Ben and Jerry's, where it's more fun and psychedelic. It's a different message with the typeface already. Most of the time, though, you don't want to stand out too much because you'll be really surprised if you see a road sign with a typeface that stands out like this. So if you keep in the background and be invisible, it's mostly mission accomplished. It should have some kind of sturdiness that when you read it, you don't get distracted. While you're in the content, you want to concentrate on that. So in this example below, for example, I think that lowercase a is very weird. Every time I come across it, I stumble and think like there's something technically wrong on it, and it takes me away from reading the rest of the text. So I think that's weird. Of course, hierarchy is important. Here you can see even like on the first example, even though the headline is cut in two pieces, it's almost unreadable because it's so big, though you can read it, and you still know it's the headline plus it's on the top of the page. But it doesn't always have to be on the top of the page. In the second example in the middle, the headline is on the bottom, and we still know that this is the headline because it's the biggest and the one that stands out the most. On the right side too, it stands out because the position of it is on the side instead of straight. So that's unusual. That will make it also kind of special. But there are a whole bunch of ways. It doesn't always have to be size to get a hierarchy. When we code it, the hierarchy would be that the H1 is the main headline of the page, and we wouldn't just use that once because search engines look for that H1 as the content. Then we go down H2, H1. But don't repeat having a lot of H1s on the page. That's not good for coding. The font size also depend on what we're looking at. We can't really control that as we get into. Mostly when we look at desktops, they're a little bit further away from us. So we got used to using at least 16 points as a text type, as when you type a letter, you can, on paper, you can usually use 12 points and it will still be pretty big to read. But it really depends on the situation and you can't always prepare that, but you could in the code detect certain viewpoints and make it like, let's say, bigger for a mobile if you know that the screen is smaller, which would be mostly on a mobile. But it also depends on the typeface, how thick or thin it is. So also font weight plays a role in how readable it is. With higher resolution screens, it became more popular to use thinner typefaces. Again, that wasn't technically so possible before. I have to warn you, though, that sometimes browsers have differences in how they display the typefaces. They have different engines, how they render the type, and it could fall between pixels. You also never know. Some people have really old screens still. What you're trying to get is a printed example, like on the top, like really crisp edges. But because of the anti-aliasing in the pixels, what you usually have when you zoom in is something like in the middle, very pixeled. And what it looks like on screen, if you would take a picture, it would be like this. So just take that into consideration, how small you want to get with the type here. And you have lots of room. Tim Brown, he wrote a book about this, and he said you can't really predict the situation people look at your type, but you can bring a raincoat. And he has in his book a lot of different techniques where you can anticipate and have fallbacks to different safety nets, so it still would show up and readable at least. But you can't control it 100%, and you don't want to, because you want to give that power to the people that control their browsers. Some people want to have it much bigger because they have trouble reading, so you don't want to stop them from reading your page just because you feel it's better that way. What's not good is if you look in a page like this much text. It would be very hard to read on the screen. We don't have time. We click through it. We want to just browse and find the information as quickly as possible. So it'd be much better if we can order it into smaller chunks. So if you start reading a paragraph and we know it's not what we're looking for, we can skip to the next and so on. And we can have headlines, we could have bullet lists. So we should break it down into paragraphs and subheads, and lists and captions, and have larger headlines, a title, a call to action that stands out for what we're supposed to do, and top images that can kind of lead us right away. And we could have it, we should all calibrate this and make them all different classes. So that would be our CSS classes to program. So we can put piles together. And that doesn't only mean piles of hierarchy and size. It also means different piles of the way we interact with it. So we could make all the navigation one bucket. We could make all the content one bucket. We could make all the sales stuff one bucket. These are kind of like categories that we should order the text in before we start coding, even just to think about it. So there's no magic button to press it, your layout become a website. So you still have to sort of know the code at least a little bit. The good thing about it, with fonts for sure and other elements too, it's not that hard. It becomes easier and easier to program these days. And now if you link Google Fonts, very easy, we showed that. External fonts or server-side fonts, also the code is relatively easy. I'm sure we can also do that. So I'm glad you're here for this class. Thank you.